My name is Claire Hastings. I'm 31 years old, and last Monday morning, I was erased from my own family with a single sentence. I had walked into my father's attorney's office, dressed in a simple black dress, expecting a quiet reading of his will. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just closure. Dad had passed away 10 days earlier after a long illness. I thought this meeting would be hard, but respectful. Instead, I was handed humiliation in front of the very people who never believed I belonged. My stepmother, Vanessa, sat at the head of the long wooden table like a queen on her throne. My half-brother Thomas leaned back in his chair, smug, flipping through his phone like the outcome was already guaranteed. No one greeted me. No one made space. The air was cold, rehearsed. The family attorney, Mr. Hartley, cleared his throat and began reading. Per the wishes of the late Richard Hastings, he started with Vanessa. To my devoted wife, I leave the Vermont estate and all personal accounts associated with Zurich Trust Holdings. Then to Thomas, to my son, I leave controlling interest in Hastings Medical, all company assets, and the executive residence in Boston. And then silence. I knew my name was next. I waited, heart pounding, bracing for my share, or at least something that reflected what I had given to this family and this company for the past decade. To Claire Hastings, Hartley continued, and I exhaled just a little. I leave a silver ring found in his nightstand drawer with the note, for the one who once believed in healing more than money. That was it. Vanessa gave a tiny, satisfied smile. Thomas let out a short laugh. My face burned, but I said nothing. I had spent 10 years turning Hastings Medical into a respected name in nonprofit care. I launched the mobile health units. I secured the community grant programs. I personally negotiated the deal that kept 3 underfunded clinics from closing. But in the end, they gave me a ring, a used, tarnished ring, and a cryptic note. I looked to Mr. Hartley, expecting a mistake. But he avoided my gaze. Instead, his eyes flicked once, briefly, down to his hand, where his fingers tapped a file folder. Then he looked back at the paper. Not a word. Thomas stood and clapped his hands twice, as if wrapping up a business meeting. Sorry, sis, he said, grinning. Guess Dad knew who the real legacy was. Vanessa leaned toward me slightly. Maybe he thought you'd be happier without the pressure. Or maybe, she said, smiling coldly, he finally saw you weren't really one of us. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply stood up and walked out, ring box still unopened in my hand. But as I reached the elevator, something about the way Mr. Hartley had tapped that file lingered in my mind. Something wasn't right, and I promise you, what happened in that room was not the end of the story. Before I tell you what was really going on, before the truth unraveled and turned everything upside down, do me a favor. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or cut out of something that should have been yours, hit that like button and drop a comment with the number 9. I want to know who's watching, because what happens next is where everything starts to shift. That day, I drove straight home, opened the ring box, and stared at the plain silver band. It was scratched, old, and I had never seen it before. But deep inside the band, I found a tiny inscription. Barely visible, it read, "Look deeper, Claire. Love, Dad." I didn't know what it meant yet, but I would. And what I uncovered in the days that followed would change everything. Not just for me, but for the people who thought they had finally erased me. I sat on my couch that evening, holding the ring, like it might whisper a secret if I stayed quiet long enough. Look deeper, Claire. My father's voice echoed in my mind, but deeper into what? The house was still, the kind of silence you feel in your bones. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down the only photo of my dad that still stood, him and me, 15 years ago, at the groundbreaking of our first community clinic. I was 16, in a hard hat too big for my head. He was smiling at me like I'd already made him proud. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going over every moment, from the reading of the will, the way Mr. Hartley avoided my eyes, the way he tapped that folder, the strange look when he read my name. That wasn't routine. That was hesitation, a signal. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Mr. Hartley. He didn't pick up. I left a message asking if we could meet, just the two of us. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up. Unknown number. His voice was quiet. Claire, meet me at the Quincy Cafe in 1 hour. Come alone. He was already seated when I arrived, sipping black coffee like it was water. He didn't smile, didn't waste time. There's something I couldn't say in that room yesterday, he said, not looking up. I waited. He slid a plain white envelope across the table. It was your father's final request that this only be given to you personally, and only if you reached out after the will. My heart pounded. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter, my dad's handwriting, slanted, firm, emotional. Claire, if you're reading this, it means you didn't take yesterday's events at face value. Good. You were never one to accept surface answers. There's more to what you saw yesterday than you know. I couldn't say everything publicly, not with Vanessa and Thomas watching. Too many eyes, too many threats. The ring was a signal. That silver band belonged to your grandmother. She hid money in the most creative ways, and I followed her lead. Use what I taught you. Go to the place where it began. Your inheritance isn't lost. It's just hidden from the ones who never deserved it. Trust Hartley. He knows where to start. Love always, Dad. I read it twice before looking up at Mr. Hartley. His face was unreadable. Your father created a second will, he said finally. A private one, legally binding, but not filed with probate. He left instructions for it to be stored separately, under a different name. What's in it? I asked. He hesitated. His shares, his voting rights, the trust fund, everything that actually matters. My stomach turned. Why didn't he say anything? Because he feared for your safety, Claire. He believed Vanessa and Thomas would destroy you if they knew you were still in line to inherit. I could barely breathe. He didn't want to see you pulled into a war, Hartley continued, but he underestimated them. He didn't think they'd go so far as to cut you out publicly. I clenched my fists. So, how do I find this second will? He slid another envelope across the table, this one smaller. Inside was a key. A storage locker, registered under your grandmother's maiden name. Unit 7C, Lowell Street. Don't go at night and don't tell anyone. I stared at the key like it was a map to buried treasure. That afternoon, I drove to Lowell Street. It was a rundown facility tucked behind a row of auto shops. No cameras, no windows. Just endless metal doors and numbers painted by hand. Unit 7C was halfway down the second aisle. I hesitated for a moment, then slid the key into the lock. The metal door groaned open. Inside was a single safe, and taped to the front, a yellow sticky note. Only one Hastings has ever known how to build. Let's see if she can open this. It was a challenge, one only my dad would think of. The code came to me in a flash. The address of our first clinic, 1,283 clicks. The door creaked open. Inside, wrapped in a weathered leather portfolio, was the real will, and beneath it, a thick folder labeled Evidence. My father had documented everything. Vanessa's offshore accounts, Thomas's embezzlement, and even audio recordings of meetings where they planned to rewrite the company charter without my input. I sat on the concrete floor of that cold locker for over an hour, reading page after page. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had armed me. And what I did with that information next would change everything. My name is Claire Hastings. I'm 31 years old, and last Monday morning, I was erased from my own family with a single sentence. I had walked into my father's attorney's office, dressed in a simple black dress, expecting a quiet reading of his will. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just closure. Dad had passed away 10 days earlier after a long illness. I thought this meeting would be hard, but respectful. Instead, I was handed humiliation in front of the very people who never believed I belonged. My stepmother, Vanessa, sat at the head of the long wooden table like a queen on her throne. My half-brother Thomas leaned back in his chair, smug, flipping through his phone like the outcome was already guaranteed. No one greeted me. No one made space. The air was cold, rehearsed. The family attorney, Mr. Hartley, cleared his throat and began reading. Per the wishes of the late Richard Hastings, he started with Vanessa. To my devoted wife, I leave the Vermont estate and all personal accounts associated with Zurich Trust Holdings. Then to Thomas, to my son, I leave controlling interest in Hastings Medical, all company assets, and the executive residence in Boston. And then silence. I knew my name was next. I waited, heart pounding, bracing for my share, or at least something that reflected what I had given to this family and this company for the past decade. To Claire Hastings, Hartley continued, and I exhaled just a little. I leave a silver ring found in his nightstand drawer with the note, for the one who once believed in healing more than money. That was it. Vanessa gave a tiny, satisfied smile. Thomas let out a short laugh. My face burned, but I said nothing. I had spent 10 years turning Hastings Medical into a respected name in nonprofit care. I launched the mobile health units. I secured the community grant programs. I personally negotiated the deal that kept 3 underfunded clinics from closing. But in the end, they gave me a ring, a used, tarnished ring, and a cryptic note. I looked to Mr. Hartley, expecting a mistake. But he avoided my gaze. Instead, his eyes flicked once, briefly, down to his hand, where his fingers tapped a file folder. Then he looked back at the paper. Not a word. Thomas stood and clapped his hands twice, as if wrapping up a business meeting. Sorry, sis, he said, grinning. Guess Dad knew who the real legacy was. Vanessa leaned toward me slightly. Maybe he thought you'd be happier without the pressure. Or maybe, she said, smiling coldly, he finally saw you weren't really one of us. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply stood up and walked out, ring box still unopened in my hand. But as I reached the elevator, something about the way Mr. Hartley had tapped that file lingered in my mind. Something wasn't right, and I promise you, what happened in that room was not the end of the story. Before I tell you what was really going on, before the truth unraveled and turned everything upside down, do me a favor. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or cut out of something that should have been yours, hit that like button and drop a comment with the number 9. I want to know who's watching, because what happens next is where everything starts to shift. That day, I drove straight home, opened the ring box, and stared at the plain silver band. It was scratched, old, and I had never seen it before. But deep inside the band, I found a tiny inscription. Barely visible, it read, "Look deeper, Claire. Love, Dad." I didn't know what it meant yet, but I would. And what I uncovered in the days that followed would change everything. Not just for me, but for the people who thought they had finally erased me. And in the next 60 seconds, 5 of the 8 members raised their hands in favor of recognizing the second will. It was done. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. But I looked Thomas in the eye and said quietly, "You built your legacy on shadows. I'll build mine on truth." And just like that, the story shifted. The girl who got a ring was about to take back the empire. Becoming CEO of Hastings Medical wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a battlefield promotion. The war was far from over. I didn't sit at my father's desk right away. I spent the first 3 days walking the halls, speaking to nurses, technicians, outreach staff, people I hadn't seen since being shoved to the margins. Most didn't even know I was back. Some hugged me. Others looked wary. And more than a few whispered, "Thank God." The company had changed under Thomas. Silent layoffs, corners cut on patient safety. Our community clinics reduced to shells of what they once were. He'd slashed programs to inflate quarterly numbers. It worked for a while, but the soul of the organization had been gutted. On day 4, I returned to the executive suite. Vanessa had already cleared out her things. Of course she had. Her lawyer called mine that morning, offering a deal. If I dropped the fraud claim, she'd graciously disappear. I said no. I didn't want quiet retreat. I wanted truth on record. But I had bigger problems. The books weren't adding up. In the first executive meeting, our CFO disclosed a $17 million hole in the projected revenue stream. Thomas had claimed expansion in Miami and Dallas. He'd even produced fake projections to sell it to the board. But there were no signed deals, no partnerships, just a pipeline full of air. It wasn't incompetence. It was fraud. The board was panicking, stock was slipping, and that's when I got the envelope. No name, no return address, just a USB drive. I took it home, plugged it into a clean laptop, and opened the only file inside, a folder labeled Hastings Legacy, 1976. The video was old, grainy. My father's voice, younger, echoed through a small office, and then another voice answered him, one I'd never heard before. "We do this quietly, Rick. You sign." He walks away, and the company's yours. I paused the video, rewound. My father had taken the company from someone else. I scrubbed forward. The name James Hastings appeared in a scanned letter. My grandfather's brother, the original co-founder. I stayed up all night, digging through archived files. When I found the original incorporation documents, the name Hastings and Hastings Medical Group was there. There were 2 founders, and one had been erased. I couldn't breathe. My entire life, I'd believed my father built this legacy with sweat and grit. But the truth was more complicated. He'd forced his uncle out in a hostile buyout and buried the evidence. The very thing I thought Thomas and Vanessa did to me, my father had done it first. The legacy I was fighting to protect was already tainted. The next morning, I drove to a small house in Dover where a return address on one of the old incorporation letters led me. A man in his 70s answered the door. His eyes widened when he saw me. "You're Claire." "Yes," I said. "How did you—" "I knew the moment I saw your face. You look like James." My great-uncle was alive. We sat in his kitchen for hours. He told me the story my father never did, how he and Richard started the clinic from a one-room operation, how my father slowly took control, manipulated investors, changed legal documents, and how one morning James showed up to find the locks changed. "I never blamed your father," he said quietly, "but I did mourn the company we meant to build, something honest, community-centered." I looked down at my hands. "That's the company I've been trying to rebuild." He smiled softly. "Then maybe you're the one to finish what we started." When I left that day, he gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a faded notebook filled with handwritten principles, 10 pages of values, simple things like never close a door on someone who can't pay, never forget what pain looks like, never leave a waiting room silent. It wasn't legal. It wasn't corporate, but it was real, and it became the foundation of what I would build next. That week, I made my first public move as CEO. We reinstated the Community Health Initiative across 4 states. We rehired every laid-off nurse and therapist we could reach. And I held a press conference, not to gloat, but to reset the narrative. I stood at the podium and said, "My name is Claire Hastings. My family built this company, but not every brick was laid with integrity. Starting today, we do things differently. Starting today, we remember who we serve." And then I did something no Hastings had done in decades. I brought my great-uncle James on stage. I handed him the original framed charter from 1976, with both his and my father's names restored. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most was that I'd found the truth, and I wasn't hiding it. The press conference sent shockwaves through the industry. The image of me, standing beside my great-uncle James, 2 generations separated by silence, now reunited, was on the front page of every health business journal in the country. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. Thomas wasn't done. 2 days later, he filed a countersuit, claiming the second will was forged, that I had manipulated a grieving old man, that I had seized power through deception, that my position as CEO was illegitimate. Layla sent me the court filing with a single line. "He's playing his final card. We're ready." Still, it shook me. Even when you know the truth is on your side, it doesn't make the lies sting any less. The court date was set. Closed session, probate, division. It was all supposed to be a formality, an extension of the will challenge, but the media got wind of it anyway. By the time I arrived at the courthouse, reporters lined the steps. Thomas, of course, made a scene. He arrived in a charcoal gray sports car, stepped out with sunglasses, and smirked at every camera. He even waved. I walked in quietly. Inside, the hearing room felt more like a stage. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for sniffing out falsehoods, called the session to order. She gave us each 15 minutes for opening arguments. Thomas's attorney leaned heavily into performance. Miss Hastings was excluded from the will for valid reasons, and now she wants to rewrite her father's final words. Why? Because power slipped through her fingers, and she can't stand to be irrelevant. I looked over at Thomas. He was watching the judge, not me. His confidence radiated off him like cologne. Then Layla stood. With calm precision, she introduced Exhibit A, the notarized second will. Exhibit B video footage of my father recorded just 10 days before his death, confirming his intentions and reading part of the will out loud. And then came Exhibit C, the dagger. A forensic document analyst, certified by the state, took the stand. I've reviewed both wills. Based on pen pressure, signature stroke consistency, ink age, and metadata from the scanned files, I can confirm that the second will is authentic and older than the one submitted to probate. The judge raised her eyebrows. Older? Yes, Your Honor. It was signed before the version Mr. Thomas Hastings submitted, which suggests he is the one who presented an outdated document. I heard Thomas shift in his chair. The judge nodded slowly. So, in effect, Miss Claire Hastings has submitted the most recent legal testament of the deceased. Correct. Layla rested our case. Thomas's lawyer attempted to object, but the judge raised a hand. Mr. Hastings, do you have any direct evidence to support your claim that the second will is fraudulent? Thomas stood abruptly. I don't need evidence, he snapped. I have history. I was the one standing by my father at the end. I handled his care. I was in the room every day. Claire was off playing savior with her clinics. She wasn't there. I stood. I didn't plan to speak, but my voice came before I could stop it. That's right, I said quietly. I wasn't there at the end. I wasn't holding his hand when he passed. I was in an emergency room at a clinic I opened, helping a teenage girl deliver a baby after her mother abandoned her. A clinic my father funded, by the way. One of the many programs you shut down. The room went still. I turned to the judge. I never asked to be CEO. I never wanted to fight my brother. I just wanted the truth to be honored. My father didn't die thinking I wasn't part of his legacy. He left a trail for me to follow, a message in every step, and I followed it. The judge looked between us, then reached for her pen. My ruling is as follows, she said. The second will is valid and supersedes all prior versions. Claire Hastings is the primary heir and controlling shareholder of Hastings Medical. Thomas froze. The judge continued. As for Mr. Hastings' challenge, this court finds it to be without merit and potentially in violation of probate ethics. You are advised not to pursue further legal obstruction. Gavel down. It was over. Thomas didn't look at me. He walked out, his posture stiff, his face blank. And for the first time in years, he looked small. That evening, I stood alone in my father's old office. I didn't sit in his chair. I just looked out over the city skyline, the same view he must have stared at for decades. I had won, but not by fighting to belong. I had proven that I didn't need their approval to have worth. Because the truth is, you don't need to be accepted to be valuable. You just have to remember who you are when no one's clapping. It's been a year since that courtroom decision, a year since I reclaimed my name and redefined what it meant. Some people expected revenge, expected me to strip Thomas of everything, to erase him the way they tried to erase me. But power, rooted in vengeance, doesn't last. And I didn't come back to destroy. I came back to rebuild, and that's exactly what I did. We restructured the leadership team at Hastings Medical, not just swapping names on doors, but reshaping the culture. We returned to our core values: community, equity, innovation. The clinics were reopened. The mobile health units rolled back onto the streets of low-income neighborhoods. We partnered with mental health nonprofits and expanded services to veterans. For the first time in years, Hastings Medical wasn't just surviving, it was trusted. The board, once divided and skeptical, now stood with me unanimously, and every quarterly report told the same story. Doing the right thing wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. And Thomas? He disappeared from the headlines after the ruling. At first, I expected retaliation, some second act of bitterness, but months later, he emailed me. Just 2 words. You won. I didn't respond, because it was never about winning. It was about truth. Vanessa relocated to the Bahamas, last I heard, and that was fine by me. She didn't reach out, she didn't apologize, and I didn't wait for it. Some people exit your life without closure. That's their final act, but not everyone faded away. James, my great-uncle, became more than a name in an old document. We meet every other Sunday. Sometimes we talk about the past. Sometimes we talk about the future. He told me once, over coffee and scrambled eggs, "You broke the cycle, Claire, and that's rarer than any inheritance." Last week, I visited one of our clinics in Roxbury. A teenage girl, maybe 16, was holding her newborn son. She smiled at me through tears and said, "This place saved my life." I walked out and sat on the clinic steps for a while, let the breeze hit my face, watched families go in and out. And I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. That voicemail, the one that cut me out, that told me I was no longer part of the family business. It didn't destroy me, it freed me. Because sometimes being cast out is the first step to stepping into who you're meant to become. I wasn't meant to inherit a broken empire. I was meant to build something better. This fall, we're rebranding the company. Not a full name change, just a shift. A reflection of the new mission, Hastings and Horizon Health. The ampersand matters. It honors what came before and what comes next. At the launch event, I'll be giving a speech, not in a boardroom, not in a courtroom, but in a community garden built by volunteers on land that was once a parking lot behind our first clinic. I've already written the final line. I stand here not because I was chosen or approved or accepted. I stand here because I kept standing, even when no one believed I should. And I hope my story reminds you of this. You don't need to be accepted to have worth. Sometimes you are the answer you've been waiting for. So if you've made it this far with me, thank you. If someone has ever shut a door on you, excluded you, erased your name from a future you helped build, I see you. I was you. And I promise you, you're not broken. You're just building something bigger. Sometimes when they try to write you out of the story, you come back as the author.